At my daughter's baby shower, she called me pathetic in front of 30 guests. I walked out without saying a word, thinking it was just another cruel moment in our fractured relationship. Or so I thought, until I discovered what she'd been hiding from me for months. And that was only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of Vivienne's living room in Willowbrook Heights, casting delicate shadows across the pastel decorations. Pink and white balloons bobbed from chairbacks, and a tower of perfectly wrapped gifts sat waiting on the antique coffee table. I'd driven 52 minutes from my small house in Maplewood to be here. Wearing the navy blue shirt Eleanor used to say brought out my eyes. My late wife had been gone 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, but I still heard her voice sometimes, reminding me to stand straighter, to smile more, to remember that family matters most. I shouldn't have come. The thought had crossed my mind twice during the drive down Route 47, past the old grain silos and the shuttered diner where Eleanor and I used to stop for coffee on Sunday drives. But you don't miss your only daughter's baby shower, even when talking to her feels like walking on broken glass that cuts deeper with each step. Vivienne and I hadn't been close since Eleanor's funeral at St. Matthew's Presbyterian. Not angry exactly, just distant. Like two people who used to live in the same house, but now only recognize each other from old photographs yellowing in frames. We spoke every few weeks, stilted conversations about the weather and my arthritis, and whether I was eating enough vegetables. But the easy warmth we'd shared when Eleanor was alive had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the awkward politeness of strangers forced to share the same last name. The living room buzzed with women I didn't know, Vivienne's co-workers from the marketing firm, neighbors from her gated community, friends from her wine club who spoke in hushed tones about organic baby food and Montessori schools. I recognized her mother-in-law, Constance Hartwell, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun who always looked at me like I was tracking mud on her Persian rugs. And there was Vivienne's sister-in-law, Bethany, who gave me a polite wave from across the room where she was arranging imported cheese on a crystal platter. I found a spot near the kitchen doorway, close enough to seem involved, but far enough away to avoid small talk about things I didn't understand. Baby monitors with Wi-Fi capabilities, organic cotton onesies that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, breast pumps that looked like medical equipment. Eleanor would have known exactly what to say. She'd have been in the center of it all, laughing with the other women, making everyone feel welcome with her infectious smile and genuine curiosity about their lives. I was just a 70-year-old retired mechanic trying not to bump into anything fragile or expensive. The house itself felt like a museum, everything pristine, coordinated, designed for display rather than living. Vivienne had always liked nice things, even as a child, but this felt different, cold. Eleanor used to joke that our daughter had champagne taste on a beer budget, but somehow Vivienne had found the champagne budget to match. The thought nagged at me as I watched her move through the room in a designer maternity dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "Dad?" Vivienne appeared beside me, her hand resting on her rounded belly. At 7 months pregnant, she had that glow everyone talks about, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The same green eyes she inherited from Eleanor, but lacking the warmth that had made her face light up every room she entered. "I'm glad you came." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. I'd missed her college graduation because of a work emergency at Peterson's auto shop. I'd missed her engagement party because I'd forgotten to mark it on my calendar. I'd missed her promotion celebration because she'd forgotten to invite me until the day after. Eleanor had always been the one to remember dates, to buy gifts, to make sure I showed up where I needed to be. Without her, I felt like a man trying to navigate without a compass. "Can you help me carry the cake from the kitchen?" she asked. "Mrs. Chen from down the street made it special." We worked in silence, Vivienne directing me to set the elaborate three-tier creation on the dining table where the other desserts were arranged like artwork. The cake was chocolate with pink buttercream roses, delicate sugar pearls, and a fondant Kate baby carriage on top. It was beautiful, professional, nothing like the simple sheet cakes Eleanor used to order from Murphy's Bakery on Main Street. The sight of it made my chest tight with memories of birthday parties in our cramped kitchen, Vivienne blowing out candles while Eleanor clapped, and I tried to capture the moment with an old Polaroid camera. That's when I noticed the photograph sitting beside the cake. It was from Vivienne's wedding day 3 years ago, professionally framed in silver sterling. But something was wrong. In the original photo, which I have a copy of on my mantle at home, I was standing beside her in my rented tuxedo, trying not to cry as I prepared to walk her down the aisle. Eleanor was on her other side, radiant in her mother-of-the-bride dress, holding a bouquet of white roses.
In this version, I'd been cropped out completely. Just Vivienne in her white dress and Eleanor beside her, smiling at someone who was no longer there. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling something twist in my stomach. When had I become someone worth erasing? "Vivienne," I started, but she was already moving away, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. Her wedding ring caught the light, a massive diamond. They must have cost more than I'd made in 6 months at the shop. "Ladies, let's start with the games." What followed was an hour of activities I didn't understand. Guessing the baby's weight and length, measuring Vivienne's belly with ribbon while everyone giggled, tasting different baby foods with your eyes closed and trying to identify pureed carrots from sweet potatoes. I sat in a folding chair someone had brought from the garage, watching my daughter laugh with women who seemed to know her better than I did. When had that happened? When had I become a stranger at my own daughter's celebration? I watched Constance Hartwell hold court near the fireplace, regaling a group of younger women with stories about Bryce's childhood accomplishments. According to her, my son-in-law had been valedictorian, quarterback, and student council president, basically walking on water since birth. She never mentioned that he'd also been arrested twice for drunk driving in college, something Eleanor had worried about but never said aloud. Constance had a way of rewriting history to suit her narrative. Bethany approached me during a lull in the festivities, carrying 2 cups of the fancy coffee they'd set up in thermal carafes. "How are you holding up, Mr. Crawford?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the response I gave everyone who asked. "Just not used to all this." I gestured vaguely at the elaborate setup. "It's a lot," she agreed, lowering her voice. "Vivienne's been planning this for months. She wanted everything to be perfect. She talks about you, about how much she misses the way things used to be." I looked across the room at my daughter, who was now explaining the rules of some game involving clothespins and the word baby. "Could have fooled me," I said. "Grief does strange things to people," she said quietly. "Some people lean in, some people pull away. Vivienne's always been a puller." Before I could respond, the gift opening began. Vivienne settled into an ornate chair someone had draped with pink and white streamers, and the other women arranged themselves in a semicircle around her. Bryce appeared from wherever he'd been hiding, probably in his study making important phone calls, to take photos with an expensive camera. The gifts were opened with ceremonial precision. A high chair from Constance that could convert into a booster seat and then a regular chair, something called a lifetime investment piece. A stroller system from the wine club ladies that looked like it belonged on a space station, complete with GPS tracking and temperature controls. A baby monitor from Bethany that could track breathing, temperature, and sleep patterns, sending alerts to your smartphone if anything seemed amiss. Each gift was met with squeals of delight and careful placement on the display table. I began to understand that this wasn't just a party, it was a performance. Everything coordinated, photographed, documented for social media posts that would prove to the world that Vivienne's life was perfect. Then she picked up my gift. It was a small box wrapped in simple silver paper with a white ribbon, modest among the elaborate packages surrounding it. Inside was a wooden music box I'd found at Heritage Antiques on Elm Street in Maplewood. It played Brahms' Lullaby, the same song Eleanor used to hum when Vivienne was little and couldn't sleep. The lid was hand-carved with a sleeping lamb surrounded by delicate flowers, and inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a tiny silver rattle that had belonged to Vivienne when she was a baby. I'd spent 3 hours at the antique shop with Mrs. Kellerman, the elderly owner, discussing the craftsmanship and the history of music boxes. She told me it was made in Switzerland in the 1960s, the same decade Vivienne was born. It felt like a sign, a perfect bridge between past and future. Eleanor would have loved it. Vivienne opened the box, and the melody began to play, thin and sweet in the sudden quiet of the room. The familiar notes filled the space, and for a moment I was transported back to Vivienne's nursery, watching Eleanor wind the same tune on Vivienne's original music box while our baby daughter's eyes grew heavy with sleep. For a heartbeat, I thought Vivienne was moved by the memory, by the connection to her mother and her own childhood. Her fingers traced the carved lamb on the lid, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or nostalgia. Instead, she snapped the lid shut with a sharp click that silenced the melody. "A music box," she said, her voice flat and cold. How quaint. A few women chuckled, the kind of polite laugh people make when they're not sure if something is supposed to be funny. Constance's mouth twitched into what might have been a smile, but looked more like a smirk. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "I thought—" She cut me off. "You thought what, Dad?" Her voice was sharper now, carrying across the room in a way that made other conversations falter. That I'd want some dusty old thing from a second-hand shop? That I'd put this next to my baby's crib so she can listen to songs from 1960? The room felt smaller, suddenly, the air thicker. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes on me, watching this private family moment turn public. The women who'd been chatting about nursery themes and pediatricians fell silent, suddenly very interested in their manicures or the pattern on the china. "It was your music box when you were little," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother used to wind it every night before—" "Don't." Vivienne's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp enough to draw blood. "Don't bring Mom into this." She would have known what to buy. She would have asked what I needed instead of assuming what I wanted. She would have cared enough to pay attention to who I am now, not who I was 30 years ago. I felt something crack inside my chest, right where the grief for Eleanor lived alongside the guilt of outliving her. "Vivienne, I do care. I drove an hour to be here because I care." "You drove here out of obligation." She stood up abruptly, the music box clutched in her hands like evidence in a trial. "You show up, you sit in the corner like you're waiting for it to be over, and then you give me something that means more to you than it does to me. Something that reminds me that the person who actually understood me is dead and I'm stuck with—" She stopped herself, but the words hung in the air between us, unfinished but perfectly clear. "With what, Vivienne? What are you stuck with?" The room was completely silent now. Even Bryce had lowered his camera. Constance leaned forward slightly, as if she didn't want to miss a single word of what was clearly the most entertainment she'd had in months. Vivienne looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her face that I'd been trying to ignore for 3 years. Not just grief or frustration, but something closer to disgust. Like the sight of me was a constant reminder of everything she'd lost, everything that was wrong with her life. "It's pathetic, Dad," she said finally, her voice now loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "This whole thing, you coming here with your sad little gifts and your sad little attempts to be part of something you don't understand. You're pathetic." The word hit me like a physical blow. Pathetic. 30 women watched as my daughter reduced me to a single, cutting adjective that seemed to echo off the pristine walls of her perfect house. I looked around the room, seeing pity in some faces, embarrassment in others. Constance looked almost satisfied, as if this confirmed something she'd always suspected about me. Bethany's face was stricken, her coffee cup forgotten in her hands. One of the younger women was staring at her phone, probably texting someone about the drama unfolding in real time. An older woman near the window was studying the curtains with sudden fascination, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after an hour in the folding chair. The room felt like it was tilting slightly, the way the world does when you've just received news that changes everything. "I'll go," I said quietly. "Dad, wait." Vivienne's voice had changed, softer now, maybe, realizing she'd crossed the line that couldn't be uncrossed. But there was no taking back what had been said in front of all these witnesses. I was already moving toward the hallway, my legs carrying me on autopilot. I picked up my jacket from the coat closet, the same brown leather jacket Eleanor had given me for our 20th anniversary. It smelled faintly of her perfume still, although that might have been wishful thinking. "Mr. Crawford?" Bethany called softly, but I didn't turn around. I nodded to no one in particular and walked out, letting the heavy oak door close behind me with a solid thump. No dramatic exit, no slamming doors, no angry words. Just a 70-year-old man walking to his car with whatever dignity he had left, which didn't feel like much. I sat in the driveway for several minutes, hands on the steering wheel of my 15-year-old Honda Civic, trying to steady my breathing. Through the front window, I could see the party resuming, the moment already moving into the past like a stone thrown into still water. But I could still hear that word in my head, bouncing around my skull like a pinball. Pathetic. Was I pathetic? I thought about my life, 45 years fixing cars, 38 years married to the love of my life, 3 years as a widower, trying to figure out how to exist in a world without Eleanor's laugh, Eleanor's wisdom, Eleanor's ability to translate my love into words my daughter could understand. Maybe I was pathetic. Maybe showing up to places where I wasn't wanted with gifts that missed the mark was exactly that. Maybe holding on to memories of lullabies and bedtime stories while my daughter built the life I didn't recognize or understand made me a sad old man clinging to a past that everyone else had moved on from. The drive home took me back through downtown Willowbrook Heights, past boutiques and coffee shops with names like Serendipity and the Gilded Lily, past the gated entrance to their subdivision with its perfectly manicured lawns and houses that all looked like they belonged in a magazine.
By the time I reached Maplewood, with its modest houses and chain restaurants and strip malls, I felt like I was returning to reality after visiting some alternate universe where everything was beautiful and expensive and cold. I pulled into my garage and sat for a moment, looking at the familiar clutter. Eleanor's gardening tools still hanging on their hooks, boxes of Christmas decorations we'd accumulated over decades, my workbench with its collection of screwdrivers and socket wrenches organized exactly the way I liked them. It wasn't much, but it was real. Inside, the house felt emptier than usual. I made a pot of coffee I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the salt and pepper shakers Eleanor had bought at a craft fair in Branson 20 years ago. She'd loved those little ceramic chickens, said they made her smile every morning. Now they just made me miss her voice saying, "Good morning, sweetheart," while she poured my coffee and planned our day. That's when I noticed the envelope on the counter, positioned precisely next to the ceramic chicken that held the pepper. It hadn't been there when I left for the baby shower.
I was certain of that because I'd eaten breakfast at this same table, reading the newspaper and checking the weather forecast like I did every morning. My name was written across the front in handwriting I didn't recognize, neat and careful, like a teacher's or a nurse's. The paper was expensive, heavier than regular stationery, with a slight texture that suggested quality. Inside was a single sheet of matching paper and a small brass key that felt substantial in my palm. The letter was short, but precisely worded. Mr. Crawford, I believe it's time you learn the truth about your daughter's financial situation and the circumstances surrounding your wife's final months. The key opens Unit 47 at Riverside Storage on Oakwood Avenue. You should go alone, and you should go soon. What you discover there will explain many things that haven't made sense since Eleanor's death. Someone who cares about the truth. I read it twice, then a third time, my coffee growing cold as the words sank in. No signature, no return address, no phone number, just a key and a promise that I'd find answers to questions I didn't even know I should be asking. Eleanor's final months. The letter writer knew something about Eleanor's final months. The phrase sent a chill down my spine because Eleanor's final months had been strange in ways I'd tried not to think about too deeply. The sudden secrecy about doctor's appointments, the unexplained trips to the bank, the conversations that stopped when I entered the room, the way she'd started locking her desk drawer, something she'd never done in 38 years of marriage. I'd attribute it all to the cancer, to the stress and fear and uncertainty that comes with a terminal diagnosis. People handle their mortality in different ways, the grief counselor had told me. Some people need to control what they can control. But this letter suggested that there had been more to it than that. I looked at the key, small and ordinary in my palm, but somehow heavy with possibility. Storage Unit 47. I'd driven past Riverside Storage dozens of times on my way to Hartwell's Hardware. It was one of those places you notice but never think about. Rows of beige metal doors behind a chain-link fence, the kind of place where people store things they don't want in their houses but can't bear to throw away. The rational part of my mind said to ignore it, throw the letter away, put the key in the junk drawer with the spare batteries and broken watches, forget about it. Anonymous letters were the stuff of mystery novels and television dramas, not the real life of retired mechanics in Maplewood. But the word pathetic was still echoing in my head, and the hurt from this afternoon felt like a weight I couldn't carry much longer without answers. What if this wasn't some cruel prank or elaborate scam? What if someone really did know something about Eleanor's last months? Something that would help me understand why my relationship with Vivienne had deteriorated so completely after the funeral. What if there were answers waiting for me in Unit 47? I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was almost 6. The storage facility would be open until 8, according to the sign I'd seen driving past. I could drive over, take a look, and be back before dark. What harm could it do? But even as I thought it, I knew that was the wrong question. The right question was, what truth was waiting for me behind that metal door, and was I prepared to live with whatever I found? I slipped the key into my pocket and reached for my jacket. Eleanor always said curiosity would be the death of me, usually while smiling and shaking her head at some project I had undertaken in the garage or some mystery I'd decided needed solving. Standing in my empty kitchen, holding a key to answers I might not want to find, I wondered if she'd been right. But I drove to Riverside Storage anyway, because sometimes the only way forward is through the door you're afraid to open. And sometimes a 70-year-old man called pathetic by his only daughter needs to know if there's more to the story than anyone has told him.
The decision would change everything I thought I knew about my daughter, my marriage, and the last 3 years of my life. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I had a key, a letter, and more questions than answers. Sometimes that's enough to start a journey you never planned to take. What secrets was Eleanor hiding in her final months? What would I find in Storage Unit 47? The truth waiting for me there would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family and force me to question every conversation, every decision, every moment since the day my wife died. The drive to Riverside Storage took 15 minutes through the quiet streets of Maplewood, past the auto parts store where I'd bought Eleanor's last birthday gift, a set of gardening gloves she'd never got to use, and the little church where we'd been married 41 years ago. The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves and the promise of an early winter. Riverside Storage sat on a dead-end street behind Miller's Feed Store, a sprawling complex of beige metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. The office was a small trailer with a hand-painted sign that had seen better decades. A tired-looking woman with gray roots showing through her auburn hair sat behind a desk covered in coffee rings and invoices. "Help you?" she asked, looking up from a crossword puzzle. I held up the brass key. "Unit 47. I'm William Crawford." She consulted a ledger that looked like it predated computers. 47. That's been paid up for 3 years. Cash every month. You the new contact? Something like that, I said, not sure how else to explain my situation. She pointed toward the back of the complex. Building C, halfway down on the left. You need a flashlight? Some of them units don't have the best lighting. I took the flashlight she offered and walked into the maze of identical metal doors. The place felt abandoned despite being half full, the kind of location where people stored the remnants of failed marriages and deceased relatives. My footsteps echoed off the concrete, the only sound besides the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Riverside Storage sat on a dead-end street behind Miller's Feed Store, a sprawling complex of beige metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. The office was a small trailer with a hand-painted sign that had seen better decades. A tired-looking woman with gray roots showing through her auburn hair sat behind a desk covered in coffee rings and invoices. "Help you?" she asked, looking up from a crossword puzzle. I held up the brass key. "Unit 47. I'm William Crawford." She consulted a ledger that looked like it predated computers. 47. That's been paid up for 3 years. Cash every month. You the new contact? Something like that, I said, not sure how else to explain my situation. She pointed toward the back of the complex. Building C, halfway down on the left. You need a flashlight? Some of them units don't have the best lighting. I took the flashlight she offered and walked into the maze of identical metal doors. The place felt abandoned despite being half full, the kind of location where people stored the remnants of failed marriages and deceased relatives. My footsteps echoed off the concrete, the only sound besides the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Riverside Storage sat on a dead-end street behind Miller's Feed Store, a sprawling complex of beige metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. I stood in front of it for a moment, the key warm from my palm, wondering if I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. The rational part of my mind whispered that this was foolish, potentially dangerous, certainly an invasion of someone's privacy. But the word pathetic was still fresh in my memory, and the mystery of Eleanor's final months felt like a weight I'd been carrying without realizing it. I slid the key into the lock. It turned easily. The metal door rolled up with a grinding screech that seemed loud enough to wake the dead. I clicked on the flashlight and stepped inside, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal something I hadn't expected. The storage unit was meticulously organized. Along the left wall, bankers' boxes were stacked 3 high, each one labeled in Eleanor's careful handwriting. Medical records 2018 to 2021, insurance documents, financial statements 2019, legal papers. Along the right wall were several pieces of furniture I recognized from our house. Eleanor's writing desk, the filing cabinet from our bedroom, a small bookshelf that had disappeared from the living room during her final months. But it was the back wall that made my breath catch. A corkboard covered the entire surface, connected by red string like something from a detective movie. Photographs, documents, handwritten notes, all connected in a web that I couldn't immediately understand. In the center was a large photograph of Vivienne and Bryce at some charity gala, both of them smiling for the camera in expensive evening wear. I moved closer, the flashlight beam revealing the scope of what Eleanor had assembled. Bank statements showing large cash deposits into Vivienne's accounts, photographs of expensive purchases, the furniture in her house, Bryce's luxury car, designer clothing, receipts for the country club membership, the private school tuition for a child who hadn't been born yet, and the elaborate landscaping that had transformed their modest starter home into a showcase property. And threaded through it all, like a roadmap of deceit, were copies of medical bills. Not Eleanor's medical bills, though those were there too. These were bills for medical procedures that had never happened, insurance claims for treatments that had never been performed, prescriptions for medications that had never been dispensed. My hand shook as I opened the first banker's box. Inside were Eleanor's final months laid out in meticulous detail. She'd been investigating Vivienne's sudden wealth, tracking every dollar, every purchase, every impossible payment, and what she discovered had killed her as surely as the cancer. A manila folder labeled "For William" sat on top of the other documents. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before she died. "My dearest William, if you're reading this, then someone has finally given you the key I asked them to hold until after my death. I pray it was the right decision to burden you with this knowledge, but I couldn't leave this world without ensuring the truth would eventually come to light. Our daughter has been stealing from my medical insurance for over 2 years. The woman we raised, the child we loved, has been filing false claims in my name and pocketing the reimbursements. When I confronted her about it, she didn't deny it. She said I was going to die anyway and that the money would help her build the life she deserved."
I wanted to call the police, William. God help me, I wanted to see justice done. But she's our daughter, and I couldn't bear the thought of you losing both your wife and your child in the same year. So I documented everything instead, hoping that someday you would be strong enough to make the choice I couldn't. The total amount stolen is $127,000. Every designer dress, every piece of furniture, every lavish dinner was paid for with money stolen from insurance meant to ease my final months. She used my pain, my dying, as her personal ATM. I love you, William. I've loved you every day of our marriage, and I'll love you beyond whatever comes next. But our daughter is not the person we thought we raised, and I fear what she might do to you if she thinks you'll stand in the way of the life she's built on this foundation of lies. Please be careful. Please be smart. And please remember that loving someone doesn't mean enabling them to destroy themselves and everyone around them. Forever yours, Eleanor. I read the letter 3 times before my mind could fully process what it was telling me. Vivienne had been stealing from her dying mother's medical insurance. The beautiful house, the expensive lifestyle, the charity galas, all of it built on fraud committed against the woman who'd given birth to her. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was in the final folder labeled Recent Activity. Eleanor had continued investigating even after confronting Vivienne, and what she'd found had driven her to desperate measures in her final weeks. Vivienne hadn't stopped with the insurance fraud. She'd started forging Eleanor's signature on financial documents, attempting to gain power of attorney, positioning herself to inherit everything the moment Eleanor died. Bank statements showed attempted transfers that had been blocked only because Eleanor had secretly changed her passwords and security questions. There was more. A copy of a new will that Vivienne had tried to file, leaving everything to her instead of the joint inheritance Eleanor and I had planned. Medical directives that would have given Vivienne control over Eleanor's end-of-life care. Forms that would have made Vivienne the beneficiary of my Social Security and pension after my death. My daughter hadn't just stolen from her dying mother. She'd been planning to steal my entire future. I sat down heavily on Eleanor's writing desk chair, the flashlight beam creating crazy shadows on the walls.
Everything made sense now. The distance between Vivienne and me after the funeral, the way she'd seemed almost impatient during Eleanor's final weeks, checking her watch during hospital visits, making phone calls in the hallway, the expensive lifestyle that had never quite added up with Bryce's salary as a marketing manager. And the baby shower, the cutting words, the public humiliation, the way she'd made me feel small and useless. It hadn't been grief or stress or the normal tensions between adult children and their parents. It had been guilt and fear and anger at the father who might eventually discover what she'd done to his dying wife. But there was something else in that final folder, something that made my blood run cold. A printed email exchange between Vivienne and someone named Marcus Kellerman, dated just 2 weeks ago. The same last name as the antique shop owner who'd sold me the music box. But this wasn't about antiques. V, your father is getting too close. The music box was a mistake. He's going to start asking questions. M, what do you want me to do about it? V, the same thing we discussed for Mom. Make it look natural. Heart attack, stroke, something age-appropriate. The insurance will pay out and we can finally stop worrying about him putting pieces together. M, the price goes up for family, $50,000. V, done. Just make it quick and clean. I can't risk him finding Mom's files. I stared at the printout until the letters blurred. My daughter was planning to have me killed, not in some distant future, but soon. The baby shower hadn't been about celebrating new life. It had been about saying goodbye to the old life she was about to eliminate. The man I'd bought the music box from, Mrs. Kellerman's grandson, Marcus, was apparently more than an antique dealer. And the concerned friend who'd sent me the anonymous letter and the key hadn't been trying to hurt me. They'd been trying to save my life. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands steadier than they any right to be. 45 years of methodical work in auto repair had taught me to be thorough, to document everything, to think through problems step by step. This was just another problem to solve, albeit one that involved my daughter planning my murder. When I'd captured every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence Eleanor had so carefully assembled, I loaded the most important files into my car. The rest would stay here until I could figure out what to do with a storage unit full of proof that my only child was a thief and would-be murderer. The drive home felt surreal. The same streets, the same traffic lights, the same familiar landmarks. But everything had changed. I wasn't the same man who'd driven to that baby shower this morning. That man had been a grieving widower trying to maintain a relationship with his difficult daughter. This man knew his daughter had stolen from his dying wife and was planning to have him killed for insurance money.
At home, I sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's letters spread before me, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd learned. The ceramic chicken salt and pepper shakers watched over the scene like tiny witnesses to the destruction of everything I'd believed about my family. The phone rang at 9:47 p.m. The caller ID showed Vivienne's number. "Dad?" Her voice was different now, softer, tinged with what sounded like genuine remorse. "I wanted to call and apologize for today. I was stressed about the party and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." I listened to her perform contrition, knowing now that every word was calculated. "It's all right, Vivienne." "No, it's not. I said terrible things. You drove all that way to celebrate with me and I made you feel unwelcome. Mom would be ashamed of how I acted." The mention of Eleanor sent a spike of rage through my chest, but I kept my voice level. "Your mother understood that people say things they don't mean when they're under pressure. I want to make it up to you. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow night? Just the three of us. We can talk properly, without all the chaos of today." Dinner at their house, where Marcus Kellerman could make my death look like a heart attack or stroke, something age-appropriate for a stressed 70-year-old man whose daughter had publicly humiliated him.
The timing was perfect from their perspective. A reconciliation dinner where the grief-stricken father could succumb to the strain of family conflict. "That sounds nice," I said, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "What time?" 7 o'clock? I'll make your favorite pot roast." The pot roast Eleanor used to make with carrots and onions and the special gravy she'd never written down the recipe for. Another calculated touch, designed to make me emotional and off guard. "I'll be there." After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time thinking about choices and consequences, and the difference between justice and revenge. Eleanor had chosen documentation over confrontation, truth over immediate action. She died carrying the weight of our daughter's betrayal, protecting me from a knowledge that might have destroyed me. But now I knew. And unlike Eleanor, I wasn't dying. I had time to make choices, to decide how this story would end. At 10:30, I called Detective Ray Morrison, a man I'd known since he was a teenager working summers at Peterson's auto shop. He was a good detective, thorough and honest, the kind of man you could trust with evidence of insurance fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. "Ray, it's Bill Crawford. I need to talk to you about a situation involving my daughter. Can you meet me early tomorrow morning? I have some documents you need to see." "Everything all right, Bill?" "No," I said, looking at Eleanor's letter in my hands. "Everything's not all right, but it's going to be." The next morning, I met Ray at the Riverside storage facility. I watched his face change as he examined Eleanor's evidence, saw his professional mask slide into place as he realized the scope of what we were dealing with. "This is solid documentation," he said, photographing each piece of evidence with his police camera. "Insurance fraud, attempted financial manipulation, conspiracy, and this email chain is pretty clear evidence of conspiracy to commit murder." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we set up a controlled meet. You go to that dinner, but you'll be wired. We'll have units positioned around the house. If this Marcus Kellerman shows up, if they make any move against you, we'll have them. And if they don't, if they've changed their plans, then we have enough evidence to arrest your daughter for insurance fraud and conspiracy. The murder plot might be harder to prosecute without them actually attempting it, but the financial crimes are ironclad." I thought about Vivienne's voice on the phone, the practiced remorse, the carefully planned reconciliation dinner. They won't change their plans. She thinks I'm a pathetic old man who doesn't suspect anything. Her arrogance will be her downfall. Ray's expression softened slightly. "Bill, I have to ask, are you prepared for where this leads? Once we make arrests, there's no going back. Your daughter will likely face serious prison time." I looked around the storage unit, at the evidence of months of theft from a dying woman, at the carefully planned murder of her husband. "Ray, the daughter I thought I had died sometime in the last 3 years. What's left is someone I don't recognize, someone who stole from her dying mother and wants to kill her father for insurance money. I'm not protecting a daughter anymore. I'm stopping a criminal." That evening, I drove to Vivienne's house in Willowbrook Heights with a wire taped to my chest and unmarked police cars positioned around the neighborhood. The house looked the same as it had yesterday. Beautiful, expensive, perfect on the surface. But now I knew the foundation it was built on. Vivienne answered the door wearing a simple dress and an apologetic smile. "Dad, I'm so glad you came." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, and meant it in ways she couldn't understand. The dinner was a performance worthy of an award. Vivienne played the repentant daughter perfectly, talking about stress and hormones and how much she missed her mother's guidance. Bryce nodded along, occasionally adding comments about family being the most important thing. They'd clearly rehearsed this. At 8:15, the doorbell rang.
"Oh, that must be Marcus," Vivienne said, as if his arrival was a pleasant surprise rather than a carefully orchestrated murder plot. "You remember Marcus Kellerman, don't you, Dad? From the antique shop. I invited him to join us for dessert." Marcus Kellerman was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of unremarkable face that would blend into any crowd. He carried a small leather bag that could have contained antique appraisal tools or murder weapons. "Mr. Crawford," he said, shaking my hand with fingers that felt cold despite the warm evening. "I heard you might be interested in some estate pieces. Vivienne thought we could discuss it over coffee." The three of them guided me to the living room, where coffee and cake were already laid out. Marcus opened his leather bag, revealing what looked like legitimate antique appraisal tools. But I caught the glint of something else, a small syringe, nearly hidden beneath a magnifying glass. "Dad," Vivienne said, settling beside me on the couch, "I want you to know how sorry I am about today. About everything, really. I know I haven't been the daughter you deserve since Mom died." "We all grieve differently," I said, watching Marcus arrange his tools on the coffee table. "Some of us grieve by pushing away the people we love most," she continued, and I had to admire her acting ability. "I think I was afraid that if I let myself need you, losing you would hurt as much as losing Mom did." Marcus had palmed the syringe now, holding it concealed in his right hand while he examined a small figurine with his left. Whatever was in that syringe would make my death look natural. Just another 70-year-old man whose heart gave out under emotional stress. "I understand," I said, looking directly at my daughter. "Sometimes people we love do things that surprise us, things we never thought they were capable of." Something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint that this wasn't going according to plan. Marcus moved closer, still talking about estate valuations and antique markets. The syringe was ready now, positioned for a quick injection that would look like a friendly pat on the shoulder or an accidental bump. "The thing about family," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "is that we think we know each other. But sometimes people change in ways we can't see until it's too late." Vivienne's smile was starting to look strained. "Dad, are you feeling all right? You seem a little tense." "I'm feeling clear-headed for the first time in 3 years, like I've finally figured out something that's been bothering me." Marcus was close enough now. I could see the needle catch the light as he prepared to strike. In a few seconds, I would be dead, another casualty of my daughter's greed and ambition. Instead, the front door burst open. "Police! Nobody move!" Ray Morrison came through the door first, followed by 4 other officers with weapons drawn. Marcus dropped the syringe, which shattered on the hardwood floor, its contents spreading in a small, deadly puddle. "Vivienne Crawford, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder," Ray announced, producing handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." The next few minutes were chaos. Vivienne screaming that this was all a mistake, that she'd never hurt anyone. Bryce claiming he knew nothing about any of it, backing away from his wife like she was contaminated. Marcus trying to run for the back door before being tackled by 2 officers. I sat on the couch where my daughter had planned to watch me die, listening to her rights being read, watching her perfect life collapse in real time. The house that had been built on stolen money, the lifestyle that had been funded by her dying mother's suffering, the future that had been planned around my murder, all of it crumbling like a house of cards in a windstorm. As they led her away, Vivienne looked back at me one last time. The mask was completely gone now, replaced by pure hatred. "You pathetic old man, you couldn't just die quietly like you were supposed to?" "No," I said, standing up slowly, feeling older than my 70 years, but also somehow stronger. 6 months later, I sat in the same courtroom where Vivienne was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for insurance fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus Kellerman received 20 years.
Bryce, who had genuinely known nothing about the murder plot but had been complicit in the financial fraud, received 5 years and agreed to testify against his wife. The house in Willowbrook Heights was sold to pay restitution to the insurance companies. The luxury cars, the designer furniture, the country club memberships, all of it liquidated to repay a fraction of what had been stolen. I kept Eleanor's storage unit, visiting it sometimes when I needed to remember that the truth matters more than family loyalty, that love without accountability isn't love at all. The ceramic chicken salt and pepper shakers still sit on my kitchen table in Maplewood. The house is still too quiet, still too empty without Eleanor's laugh and her wisdom and her ability to see the best in people, even when they disappointed her. But I'm not pathetic anymore. I'm a 70-year-old man who survived his daughter's attempt to murder me, who honored his wife's final wishes, who chose justice over the comfortable lie of family harmony. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it has to be.
The baby was born 3 months after Vivienne was sentenced. A little girl named Eleanor, according to Bryce, who sends me pictures occasionally from whatever new life he's building far from the wreckage of his old one. I've never met my granddaughter, may never meet her, but she carries Eleanor's name, and maybe that's a kind of redemption, a way for something good to grow from all this tragedy. I keep the music box on my mantle now, the one that started all of this. Sometimes I wind it up and listen to Brahms' lullaby while I think about choices and consequences and the difference between the family you're born with and the family you choose to be. The melody is thin and sweet, just like it was in that storage unit when everything changed, just like it was when Eleanor used to hum it to a little girl who grew up to steal from her dying mother and plan her father's murder. But the song remains beautiful, even when the memories it carries turn bitter. Truth has a way of doing that, making something pure survive, even when everything around it becomes corrupted. And that, perhaps, is the only justice that really matters in the end.